I have never thought it good business to play any game in any place where it is necessary to keep an eye on the dealer who is likely to cheat if unwatched, because against the whining Welsher, the decent man is powerless. Jesse Livermore. Welcome to Lodestar, where we explore the greatest stories never told, drilling deep into the non-trivial history of now. And now we continue with the story of Clarence Saunders and the Piggly Wiggly Crisis. Part 3. The Terrible Trap. After his blow-up with Jesse Livermore, who had refused to spring the trap and call for delivery on all of the stocks loaned to the Bears, Saunders left New York fuming and plotting his next move. From January to early March of 1923, Saunders had driven the stock's price up from 50 to above 70, but had incurred tremendous debts to both the corporate treasury and in his own name. He'd begun the operation with the backing of local bankers and friends in Memphis, Nashville, and St. Louis, and raised $2.5 million at the start, which would be worth more than $46 million in 2024 dollars. In late December, he delivered a glowing report for the company's future and announced a double dividend, while quietly pulling a close ally aside to mention that he needed $50,000 a day to continue the operation. Skittish brokers were beginning to demand that he pay in cash for the stocks that he had been able to buy on margin, and so he'd set off, searching the country for more cash to make his final push, first securing loans from 2 New York banks, and finally he managed to bring in an additional pool of backers through his grocery connections in New Orleans. En route, he was handed a telegram sent from a friendly member of the stock exchange. The message informed him that his antics had provoked a great deal of headshaking in the councils of the exchange, and urged him to stop creating a second market by advertising the stock for sale at a price so far below the quotation on the exchange. At the next station, Saunders telegraphed back a rather unresponsive reply. If it was a possible corner the exchange was fretting about, he said that he could assure the governors that they could put their fears aside, since it was he himself who was maintaining the floating supply and daily offering the stock for loan in any amount desired. But he didn't say for how long he would continue to do so. A week later, on Monday, March 19th, Saunders ran a newspaper ad stating that his stock offer was about to be withdrawn, and that this was the last call. At the time, or so he claimed afterward, he had acquired all but 1,100 of Piggly Wiggly's 200,000 outstanding shares, some of which he owned, and the rest of which he controlled, a reference to the installment plan shares that certificates he still held. Though the exact number is still debated, there is no denying that Saunders had his hands on practically every single share of Piggly Wiggly that was available for trading. And though no one, himself included, realized it at the time, Clarence Saunders had just achieved the game's last great corner. On that same Monday, perhaps feeling a tinge of trepidation, Saunders phoned Livermore one last time and made a final plea if he would see the project through and call for delivery. In other words, would Livermore help him spring the trap? Nothing doing, Livermore famously replied. He had tried to persuade Saunders from taking the final step, but Saunders was on a righteous mission and thought him a coward, or perhaps more concerned with protecting his standing in the Shark Tank than in righting its wrongs. Saunders had never believed that this kind of man could walk away from such an enormous payday, but Livermore's hard-won experience had taught him that. The speculator's deadly enemies are ignorance, greed, fear, and hope, and all of the rules of all of the exchanges on Earth cannot eliminate these from the human animal. As the king of the bears, Jesse Livermore knew the cost of taking a stock operation too far, and he had another very good reason to balk at Saunders' final request, because during a similar operation, he'd once answered that same phone. "Hello? You bastard, Livermore. This is your doing and you're gonna pay. I'm broke, thanks to you." No, I'm more than broke. I owe my broker thousands of dollars of margin money. But I still got my gun. And I'm headed down there to blow your brains out. And the next time you answer your door, I'll be standing there. And the next thing you know, you'll be walking through the gates of hell, which is where you deserve to be. Jesse Livermore knew when to cut his losses and run like hell. Livermore then picked the phone back up and rang all of his brokers to quietly unload every remaining share of Piggly Wiggly's stock. And so, on the following morning of Tuesday, March 20th, 1923, Saunders alone lit the fuse on what turned out to be one of Wall Street's wildest days. Piggly Wiggly opened at 75.5, up 5.5 points from the previous day's closing price. An hour after the opening, word arrived that Saunders had called for delivery on all of his Piggly Wiggly shares. According to the rules of the exchange, the stock had to be produced by 2:15 the following afternoon. Saunders knew that there weren't enough shares available for the bears to cover, and feasted his gaze on their desperate scramble for the handful that were still held by the public. And since little trading could actually happen, frantic short sellers trying to shake loose the shares that they could locate bid the price up and up. On the floor of the exchange, the area surrounding the trading post where Piggly Wiggly was bought and sold became a mob scene. Nearly all of the brokers present began to cluster around it. Most of them, eager to get in on all of the excitement, were just looking for a good push and a whoop, as a desperate few among them screamed their bids into the melee. 90, 100, 110. Because any price was better than the alternative. Traders likened the scene to the classroom experiment of watching a mouse in a glass bell jar when they begin to pump out the air. You can see the little creature begin to breathe faster and faster, its sides heaving like overworked bellows, trying to get enough oxygen out of the decreasing supply until its eyes nearly pop out of their sockets at its final gasp. The spoils of war. Reports began to circulate of phenomenal profits. One lucky investor had come down from Rhode Island and waded into the pit with 1,100 shares he'd bought on the cheap at the height of the raid. He then hurriedly hopped aboard a train back home with $70,000 in profits, or $1.25 million in today's dollars. He could have done even better if he had bided his time. By noon, or a little after, the price of Piggly Wiggly had hit 124, and it seemed destined to zoom straight through the roof, when a rumor reached the floor that the governors of the exchange were assembling for an emergency. The whispers swirled that the bosses of the exchange were preparing to suspend trading in Piggly Wiggly and possibly worse, postpone the short sellers' deadline. On the rumors alone, Piggly Wiggly dropped from 124 down to 82, and a sinister calm crept over the trading pit. Pale, breathless traders awaited the closing bell to see for whom it tolled. The rumors proved to be true. After the close of business, the governing committee of the exchange announced both the suspension of trading in Piggly Wiggly and the extension of the short sellers' delivery deadline until further action by this committee. No official reason was given for this decision, but some of the members of the committee unofficially let it be known that they had been afraid of a general panic if Saunders' corner was not broken. We'll explore the validity of this argument in our next episode. But skeptics may have wondered if, as a few earlier corners had revealed, that some of the governors of the exchange were themselves lurking behind the bare side of the wall. After all, who is a governor but a big fish trader who's bought a seat? It's important to remember that then, as now, the stock exchange is not a public trust. It's a private club run by barons for barons. And this is true of the clearinghouses and private corporations behind the scenes who control the levers that lift the world. Of course, they permit the public to loiter in the parking lot where money can be made, but as our next episode will highlight, that for the ones on top, the only thing in the game that matters is the game, and whatever it takes to keep it going. In a move eerily similar to what would occur nearly 100 years later at the climax of the short squeeze on GameStop and AMC, the governor's actions made it clear to all that to deal with this nuisance, they were willing to rewrite their own rules on the fly and contain the fallout later. History rhyming. In January of 2021, a group of small investors coordinated a similar short squeeze using online message boards and newly popular mobile trading apps, especially Robinhood, to drive the price of GameStop from around $4 to over $120, roughly a 3,000% increase over a dramatic period of nearly 3 weeks before the powers behind the scenes decided to throw the kill switch on trading. At the time, GameStop was on an upward trajectory, and by halting trading, Robinhood effectively capped the potential gains of retail investors, while also capping the losses for Melvin Capital, the hedge fund, attempting to short the company into the ground. It's also worth noting that during the halt, Robinhood's users were able to sell their stocks, just not to buy any more of them. Robinhood's CEO, Vladimir Tenev, claimed that the GameStop short squeeze was a 1 in 35 million event. The reason for this decision given by Mr. Tenev involved arcane technical aspects of their operation. That the unexpected surge in orders had forced Robinhood to meet suddenly increased capital requirements to protect against default in a few volatile stocks. In other words, their risk models failed to predict an army of small investors operating in a coordinated fashion. There was no legal requirement to stop the trading. It was a business decision. The increased capital requirements that Tenev cited as the reason to halt the trading are set by the Depository Trust and Clearing Corporation, which is essentially a for-profit clearing agency. The DTCC and its subsidiaries are wrapped in quasi-official status, but it is a privately held corporation that handled transactions worth $2.37 quadrillion in 2021, making it by far the largest financial value processor in the world. For reference, a quadrillion is 1,000 trillion, or a 1 with 15 zeros behind it. The DTCC is owned by the users of its regulated subsidiaries. Robinhood is a member of the DTCC and one of its major users, so it follows that they may have some say in how it makes decisions. The increased capital requirements do indeed present an existential threat to Robinhood's entire business model, which they are quick and keen to point out. But these requirements also offered Robinhood a convenient way to pass the buck, and the chicken and egg nature of Robinhood's reason for halting trading was never fully addressed. Robinhood pioneered the gamification of stock trading, offering zero-commission trading at users' fingertips. But, as the saying in Silicon Valley goes, if the service is free, then you are the product. How the sausage gets made. What Robinhood's CEO avoided mentioning was that Robinhood makes the majority of their revenue from market makers. Market makers are essentially rent-seeking middlemen that help provide liquidity to the system and support the amount of volume the market can process. Market makers pay Robinhood to route customer trades through them rather than sending them directly to the exchanges where the stocks are traded. They are then able to pocket the difference on the spread between the bid and ask prices. Robinhood uses several of these market makers, but the largest of which is Citadel Securities, that provided 22% of their revenue for executing customer trades that year. In the previous year, Citadel Securities was censured by the industry's regulator a total of 19 times for a variety of misconduct, including front-running customer trades, failing to offer customers the best prices on their trades, and executing trades during circuit breaker halts. And it's market makers like Citadel who provide the capital that makes zero-commission trading possible. But there's no such thing as a free lunch. And as events showed, they wield tremendous power behind the scenes. Melvin Capital made good use of the trading halt to begin reversing its position against GameStop and desperately seeking a bailout from other institutional investors. When it was revealed that Robinhood's biggest behind-the-scenes customer, Citadel Securities, contributed $2 billion of the total $2.75 billion bailout for Melvin, investors cried foul. But let's pause for a moment to recall that the increased capital requirements that were blamed as the whole reason for the halt were put in place to protect Robinhood's paymasters, who provide their main source of income. Citadel was by far their biggest paymaster of all, so Citadel was the biggest beneficiary of these changes. And also keep in mind that these rule changes were mandated by the DTCC, a privately owned organization of which Robinhood and Citadel were both members. And of course, it would have been foolish to let a perfectly good crisis go to waste. So just as Melvin was gifted a trading halt by the DTCC that bought them precious time to dig themselves out of their risky bet that backfired, Citadel then wheeled around and bought a huge stake in Melvin. But this can get pretty confusing, so sorry if we lost you. Just hang on a second, and let's try to put the whole thing in gaming terms. Imagine you're a desperate Melvin, trapped on the planet of the apes. You've been cornered in a foxhole and surrounded by an army of angry gorillas about to rush your position from all sides. Then, just as you run out of ammo and prepare to become monkey meat, out of nowhere, a napalm strike rains down from the sky and pushes them all back. black helicopter stamps Citadel swoops down and drops you a golden ladder. Without hesitation, you grab hold and flip those dumb monkeys the bird as you're whisked away. It turns out the entire planet was terraformed with Citadel's money, and they invite you to join their ranks as a Citadelian. So instead of getting murked, you unlocked God mode. Pretty sweet for you, huh? But for all the folks watching at home and trying to follow the game, it wasn't quite so amusing. The incestuous optics of Robinhood's biggest behind-the-scenes customer, Citadel Securities, taking a huge stake in the hedge fund that was benefiting the most from the trading halt, while at the same time being the biggest beneficiary of the increased capital requirements that justified the halt, seemed egregious even by Wall Street standards. New York Representative Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez tweeted, "This is unacceptable. We now need to know more about Robinhood's decision to block retail investors from purchasing stock, while hedge funds are freely able to trade the stock as they see fit." To which Texas Senator Ted Cruz immediately replied, "I agree." If this odd twist sparked hope for the insurgents, they needed not hold their breath. Hearings were held that ended with a whimper, and the public's attention rapidly faded. Robinhood repeatedly denied it was acting at the behest of hedge funds hurt by the GameStop rally, but more than 50 lawsuits were filed against Robinhood by angry customers. In the aftermath of the meme stock fiasco, to meet the new margin requirements, the trading app turned to investors for its own $3.4 billion mini bailout, which exceeded its total fundraising history to that point. The company ended up losing more than $3.5 billion in 2021 and has not yet fully recovered. We will further explore the parallels between this digital dumpster fire and our story in the final episode. But to understand the historical significance of these events, it's worth noting that in every major market crash of the past century, a period leading up to the event was marked by some innovation that captured the public's attention and invited a new generation of small investors to charge into the market for the first time. According to Deloitte, in January of 2021 alone, close to 6 million Americans downloaded a retail brokerage trading app. Over the decade leading up to these events, the amount of stocks bought and sold by individual investors rose from just above 10% in 2011 to over 22% in 2021. And much like our story, around that fateful year of 1923, when an explosion of friendly local brokerages, led by Merrill Lynch, set up shop across small-town America and began prodding customers to cash in their sleepy wartime Liberty bonds and start buying stocks, unleashing the furious bull market that would stampede off a cliff in 1929. And while it may be a bit of an exaggeration that every shoeshine boy was in the market, it's estimated that about 20% of Americans bought individual stocks over that time. And future generations may look back to a similar moment in time when everyone was stuck at home, and many of them, with a tingling in their pocket, experienced that first uncontrollable urge to take a quick break from the Tiger King and check out the market. Because over the decade leading up to these events, the amount of stocks bought and sold by individual investors more than doubled. And since the period of pandemic lockdowns, this trend appears to be ever increasing, adding both liquidity and risk to markets. The importance of Robinhood in both driving and benefiting from this shift should not be understated. Since early 2020, they have commanded the largest share of retail trades executing between 1/3 and half of this increased volume. And so, it's no wonder that these platforms became the central battleground in the eternal struggle between Wall Street and Main Street interests. The forces behind the meme stop crisis are still very much in play, and the root causes of this chaos are worth remembering. Their ability to unilaterally stop the clock and call a timeout must be a factor to consider every time the user swipes up. And so, when the next crash comes, how these actors might be tempted to wield their power should be of great interest to anyone who believes that history rhymes. Or, as Jesse Livermore once observed, there's nothing new under the sun, and least of all in the stock market. But their decision to halt trading was far from unprecedented, and the gobsmacked guerrilla traders needed only look to the events of 1923 and what happened next for Clarence Saunders to see how fate rewards such bold adventurism. Despite the unexpected turn of events, in Memphis, Saunders was in a jubilant mood that evening, as his paper profits ran to several $million. He went to bed convinced that besides having personally brought about a first-class mess on the hated stock exchange, he had made himself a bundle and had demonstrated how a poor Southern boy could teach the city slickers a lesson. Newspaper editors from coast to coast worked late into the night, setting their type with glowing editorials, recapping Saunders' audacious exploits for all of their readers. And a flood of congratulatory telegrams began to arrive in Memphis. Jesse Livermore's involvement up to that point had become an open secret, and the day's dramatic events compelled Saunders' ex-partner to hedge out his own terse statement to the press, declaring, "I never conducted any transactions in the stock for my own account." The die was cast, but had Livermore's former pupil paused for a moment to consider how easy it had all been to have suddenly captured both the strategic high ground and the fascination of the public, Saunders may have realized that, like Teddy Roosevelt on San Juan Hill, he charged so hard that he was now alone and deep behind enemy lines. The facts were on Saunders' side, but he was no longer running a scrappy game of corner on a few unfortunate bears. Clarence Saunders was set on a collision course with destiny, immortalized in the financial pantheon as the Wiggly crisis, because he had just locked horns with the masters of the universe, and they were set to play a very different game. Please join us for part 4 of Clarence Saunders and the Piggly Wiggly crisis, when our chess match will become a boxing match with consequences and repercussions.
Folks have just been down to Memphis town. That's where the people smile on you all the while. Hospitality, they were good to me. I couldn't spend a dime, I had the grandest time. I went out a-dancing with the Tennessee deer. They had a fella there named Handy with a band you should hear. While those white folks swayed, how those band boys played real harmony. I never will forget the tune that Handy called the Memphis Blues. Oh, them blues, the